Make your best judgment. That's all you have to do.
Okay.
You don't have to think about what anybody else wants you to think or anybody. All you want to do is think for yourself.
So that was my dad. He's giving advice to my daughter after a few cocktails. And I think it's important advice. And on the other hand, I don't think it's enough to think for yourself, at least not if you're a writer or academic. You also need to be able to speak to be heard and to write to be read.
This video is about Marcus Tullius Cicero, who lived in 106 to 43 BC, and he was one of the most famous Romans in the ancient world. He was a politician, a consul, a lawyer, a philosopher, and one of the best of Rome's fabulous orators, though we know him best by the prolific letters he wrote. He was also one of the senators in the Republic who stabbed Caesar, so Mark Antony, as in Antony and Cleopatra, had him beheaded. I want to talk about Cicero's formula for persuasive speech, even though we're talking about rhetoric and writing. An important thing to know about Cicero is that while he advocated factual information and rhetoric, he said that your ability to persuade your audience, whether through pathos or by whatever strategies you use, was ultimately more important, because if nobody listened to you, they wouldn't even hear your logos. Okay, first of all, let's talk about the intro, which should establish your credibility or your ethos. If you're not a famous expert in your field, you'll have to rely on your inventiveness. You narrow down your key message, you come up with the main points, and you link up the proof or references to your points in a way that makes your reader want to listen. The second step requires skill in narration. Now, I interpret this in a postmodern way. That is, perspectives on reality don't exist in the world until we invent them, though persuasive rhetoric makes a given argument seem obvious or as a matter of fact rather than as a matter of invention or manipulative strategies in rhetoric. Now let's move on to narration, where you focus on how you lay out your argumentation. You'll want to arrange the paragraphs of the body of your essay in an artful and clever way. Here are highlights from the Gladwell video I uploaded.
More opportunities you build into your pieces for reactions, to invite the reader into the same thought process I'm going through, then I do it. And I pose a puzzle. And in the way that I write the puzzle is, this is a puzzle for you, the reader. What do you think?
Cicero calls the next step division. In this step, you hone in on what it is that you're trying to prove. You also distinguish yourself from your counterpoints or naysayers. You have to be careful, though. The people who might push back against your argument might be the people you need to persuade. You'll have to consider what sort of appeals will work for the audience that would disagree with you, because you don't want to turn them off. Rather, you want to persuade them to come to agree with you. As a novelist, I think of style as my own distinctive voice. As an essay writer, I think of style as making choices that the audience will likely respond to. In the next step, proof, Cicero's referring to making sure your quotes, facts, and statistics are correct and that you have them memorized so that you won't lose a debate. I translate this into written rhetoric as mnemonic devices such as repetition to help the reader remember the facts and figures that I want them to take with them and disseminate to other people. Refutation. Looking at the rubric, you might get the wrong idea that the counterargument is just one tiny little aspect of rhetoric, but it's not. It actually drives your audience and the way you lay out your argumentation. You must demonstrate to skeptics who would push back on your ideas that you understand where they're coming from, you know your opposition's opinions inside and out. Otherwise, they're going to dismiss you because they'll think that you just don't know what you're talking about, that you haven't been exposed to what they've been exposed to. So you have to understand other opinions or other perspectives as well as your own. Further, you need them to like you or at least identify with you. And that means using rhythms, tones, and gestures that they can identify with. In oral arguments, gesture and tone often mean your material, your actual body bodily stance and the tone of your voice. In writing, that translates into the imagery you use in figurative language, or the level of diction, the kind of jargon or absence of jargon that you use for your particular audience, which again, that's the audience you most need to persuade. You should make use of all of the appeals, ethos, logos, and pathos, but accentuate the appeals that your audience would most likely respond favorably to. Side note, notice that ethos says think ethics. I used to teach ethos as just ethics, and more people are referring to it as credibility. Sometimes those feel like the same thing, sometimes they don't. I just want you to be aware that some instructors that you talk to later in your academic career might consider ethos a matter of ethics, particularly in an era of disinformation which becomes misinformation. Cicero argues that the best way to come to a conclusion is to recall the facts and the argumentation, but to use a strong appeal to pathos or emotional appeal to make people feel good about the transformation they've just made thanks to you laying out the argument. When you change your mind, or when you introduce somebody to different ideas, they're either going to be pissed off or they're going to feel good about it because they'll feel like they learned something that will enrich their lives. You want to leave them with the emotional sensation of feeling satisfied and impressed and happy to carry the message, because if you piss them off, your message is going nowhere. So that's Cicero, and one need only look at the current political climate to understand that he was right. While facts and evidence are the ethical mode of argumentation, they're not the necessary one. You can carry an argument through persuasion alone, through pathos and, charisma, stuff like that. If you've been staring at your literature review wondering how you adjust the genre to persuasive writing in the argument paper, I would like you to watch the entire Gladwell video in Media Gallery, Write for Reader. If you haven't seen that already, I'd like you to see that, to let it set a bar for you, and then I hope that this helped as well. Talk to you later. Make an appointment with me if you want to talk about it in person. Well, on Zoom.